Hello, welcome to Getting Your Ducks in a Row. I'm your host Jason Windle, and today I'm joined by Richard Gill, Director at Paul Archer Design, an award-winning architectural practice celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. Paul Archer Design has built a reputation for beautiful, sensitive and intelligent architecture, specialising in high-quality residential projects across London and the South. Richard's journey is one of genuine craft and curiosity. He started his career working on large-scale commercial projects, but soon found his true passion in the personal, hands-on nature of home design. In this episode, we talk about what makes a house feel good, the challenges of balancing beautiful modern interventions with sensitive conservation work, and we also talk about how architecture can support well-being, how to approach sustainability practically, and why the best projects often come from real collaboration. Let's get into it. Morning, Richard. Welcome to the show.
Morning, Jason. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. Thank you for taking the time to join us. It's a lovely, for our listeners, it's a lovely sunny day here. So Richard and I were just talking about the post-Easter break and having a bit of sunshine to help ease that transition.
Brilliant.
Much needed, I think. If we just start off, Richard, if you could just sort of go into a bit about your sort of journey through the career, through the industry, starting from Whole School of Architecture, as I understand it, and then obviously ending up where you are currently, Director at Paul Archer. Just give our listeners a bit of an understanding for where you started, why architecture as well, and then your journey to where you are now.
Seems like a while ago. Maybe you can tell from my accent. I'm a northerner. I'm from Hull. And grandfather was a contractor, builder, brickie. Father engineer, so always surrounded with making things was always important. I always had a pencil, always drawing, so it was always going to be creative for me. I was building things. Why architecture? Blend of science, blend of art. I liked learning how things were made, was constantly taking things apart. And again, the drawing, it just came hand in hand. So that was always kind of going to be my path from an early age. You get to a point where you start choosing a course. Do you do interior design? Do you do engineering? Architecture seemed like a blend of both. And so that's why I ended up at the Hull School of Architecture. Had a brilliant time there and a fantastic time. But what I would say is when you're from the provinces, London is the place to be for design. No two ways about it. Yes, I could have got a job, and many of my friends got jobs, back home. London just operates on a very different scale. So I think to any of your listeners that are in or around London, it is a melting pot. It is amazing, the opportunities you have. So at that point, I, having finished university, packed up and moved to the Big Smoke. And that was back in 2000. So yes.
Wow, so 25 years.
25 years. So 25 years. Yes.
Oh, congratulations!
When I came down to, I'm now more of a southerner than a northerner.
Well, I was going to say the congratulations wasn't necessarily for the 25 years. It was for that you've survived as a northerner in London for 25 years.
No, but I think it's just I love it. We have a lot of banter. But I think when I first moved to London, it was the opportunity and it was just the enthusiasm for things that could happen. And so the first practice I worked for was a large commercial practice called Fletcher Priest Architects, and they do large offices, tower blocks in the city. I think at the time when I joined, there were about 50 people in that practice, but currently there are over 100 people. Corporate headquarters, they were the kind of things that you worked on. It was lots of people, lots of designers, engineers, architects, all working on one single building. They'd take several years to get through planning, to design and build. Fantastic learning curve. I mean, you're in amongst it, and just the people that you meet. But these were kind of big projects.
So you plied your trade there, basically, and
Yeah, exactly. And just in terms of the qualifying as an architect, if anyone is unfamiliar, you kind of go through, although it is in slight change now, but you do your degree, which kind of gets you a part one. You then go spend a year out working. Usually, I did it at I did do it at a local practice actually on the outskirts of Hull. Great doing residential projects. Believe it or not, even though I'm not that old, but we were working on drawing boards at that time, which is a very good skill to have. And I've got to say, you can't beat the pencil.
I agree. I'm very old school as well, Richard.
Really?
I have notepad, paper. My team often make fun of me for it because some of them are quite a bit younger than me, and they use their laptops constantly to take notes. But I just like pen and paper. I remember it more as well. If I write it, I remember it.
That's why, and I just say to people, the process of sketching or drawing something out, working a detail, it lodges in your head. It gives you thinking time as opposed to getting the computer to do something, which computers are amazing tools, but um, the pen and paper and just that process of designing by hand is something. Anyway, I digress. So, worked in a provincial practice, came down to London, working for this big practice. What was my first job? Yeah, so I worked as part of the interiors design for Vodafone's headquarters. So if you think about this, this was a headquarters building, seven new buildings around a man-made lake in Newbury. If anyone's been to Vodafone's headquarters, it was massive. And it was, to house, I think, about over 3,500 staff members. It had restaurants, gyms, everything. It was huge. And I learnt an enormous amount about being an architect, how the construction industry works, the different disciplines. An amazing time. So, like I say, you do a degree, get your part one, spend a year out. You go back to university, do part two, so diploma or currently masters. Then you go out into the world of work. And even at that point, you don't qualify fully as an architect until you've done your professional examinations. So whilst I was working at Fletcher Priest, I was, working in the daytime. Then you do some kind of part-time course to get your professional qualification, and it exposed me to all elements of one construction detailing, project management, design, and the legal side of kind of the construction contracts, um, deals, planning, legislation. So there's a lot of it, lot of learning to do at that stage in your career. And then I think only when you then qualify does it really start. Do you really start to learn? So you do all this training to get to that point of architect, but then the learning starts to happen. So I spent 3 years there, and what I realised personally was I was such a small cog in such a big machine, and I quite like detailing, and sometimes I can be a bit impatient. And so I kind of just reassessed what I wanted to do, what kind of architect I wanted to be. And I took a year out and I traveled the world. So I would recommend it to anybody to go out there and see the world.
Where did you travel to?
I saved up enough money and because I didn't want to go and then work. A lot of people, the typical Brit thing, go to Australia, get a
Like
job.
£5.50 and a walnut whip in your pocket or whatever.
Absolutely. And you go, work in a bar in 6 months goes and you come back broke. Sure you have a great time. But what I did was I saved up money and went to America, flew out to the kind of did a kind of U shape, New York, and well, landed in Boston actually, Chicago, New York, went south, New Orleans, went down to kind of even the El Paso, Arizona, Vegas, up California, flew out to New Zealand, a few weeks in New Zealand, North Island, South Island, fantastic. Then to Australia, and I've did rather than going up the East Coast, kind of went down the South, West Coast, and then down to the middle, Nauru, flew out, Cambodia, Vietnam, all the kind of South, Asian countries, then across to India, northern India, huge amount of, things to see, experience, cultures. I think just when wanting to be a designer, it's important to, you know, get that information, kind of educate yourself.
I think expose yourself to different cultures, different ways of doing things. I think for a creative mind, you're naturally curious. I think, and I think if you can sort of almost scratch that itch, as it were, and be exposed to different things,
Yeah,
and sort of broaden your horizons. I think that's only going to be a benefit for someone who is in the industry that you're in.
absolutely. And we enjoy design and stuff, but to actually experience spaces, you know, everyone says it, it's subjective, but when you're in a good space. I mean, I must admit, standing on the opposite side of the world and touching the Sydney Opera House was a moment. You see it kind of going through the gates of the Taj Mahal. I was at, you see a lot of wonderful spaces, but I must admit, it was breathtaking.
Sydney for me, I've been to Sydney a couple of times, and I don't know what it is about it, and I'm sure that the weather has something to do with it because when it's sunny, when the weather's good, everything is just better, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but it's where the opera house is, and you've got the water there, and there are boats travelling around, and there's a lot going on. You're close to the business district where you've got the skyscrapers, the sun shining, everyone's wearing like flip flops. It just feels like they've got it right over there, you know?
But you've got this unique building. If you think about it, it's amazing. And I don't know if any of your listeners are aware that there was a lot of turbulence in the the making of that building and it going over budget and lots of things. But it is one of the the greatest landmarks.
Absolutely. Well, I think, as you say, I think inevitably projects like that are innovative in themselves sometimes do have a habit of going over budget over time because there isn't a blueprint necessarily to follow, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I then when they would have left that, India, then back to Malaysia for a wedding, and then flew back just in time for Christmas.
So you did all of that in a year?
Yeah, yeah. So it was 10 and a bit months, after close to 11 months, I was away. And then landed and then celebrated Christmas back home with the folks. And then it was kind of like, right, I need to get a job. Where do I
Yeah.
go? What do I do? And I was like, I don't know. And then and I adore my hometown, but it was a bit small. And so the draw of London came back, and I applied to a number of practices. I was just thinking, what kind of practice do I want to work for? What kind of architect do I want to be? Because it's, yes, we're in the same field, but you become a very different architect if you want to work on, say, master planning. And you're kind of looking at kind of big scale, kind of macro kind of. And I like detail. I like nuts and bolts. I like to know how things go together. And I was looking for a practice. I was also considering my career options as well. I wanted to go join a practice that was growing, so I could grow with it. Just thinking about, potential promotions, that kind of thing. And I saw an advert for Paul Archer Design, small practice. Like at the time, they had 6 people working for them, um, doing, I would call small projects, domestic scale, but innovative. And I thought, well, I'll just, I'll try here. Um, Paul, wonderful, wonderful, boss. Um, he gave me a job, and and it's funny. You spend a lot of time studying at architecture school, and a lot of architects, maybe it's a bit of a moot point, but come out of architecture school, you don't actually know how to detail a building fully, because architecture is such a broad subject. You can start with the art, you can start with the history, you can start with kind of environmental sciences, you can start with contract law. You have to wear a lot of different hats. So when you come out, you have all these kind of general skills, but you haven't pulled it all together. And so I think, certain people considering architecture need to be aware of that. When you come out, you kind of go, what what use can I be? And a lot of students are fantastic at doing kind of computer renders, but I've never been, you need to get yourself on a building site. You need to kind of understand how, you can draw a piece of wood, but there's no substitute of actually getting 2 pieces of wood together and, and doing those things. And I think I just reiterate, going back to my grandfather and my father, I've kind of had a go at doing electrics, plumbing, plastering. I'm not a very good plasterer, but you know, working with those materials is hugely important.
I think it's an interesting point, and I agree in the sense that knowing how it works, knowing the practical side of it, makes the sort of theoretical side, if you want to call it that, your ability to deliver that side a hell of a lot more effective because there's theory and then there's practice, and I often hear stories and on the in our industry about you know architects and the people that are actually doing the work, and there's often a conflict between the two because the I don't know, the bricklayer or the electrician or whatever will be saying the architect doesn't know what he's doing. It's not possible to carry out this plan because of X, Y, and Z. And there's often a bit of a gap there because perhaps there isn't the two industries or two sectors are perhaps too far apart. And I think where your point helps about understanding the reality of it, having feet on the ground and having a bit of time to understand the mechanics and the real world, if you like, helps you guys massively.
No, it does. I think it's. I'll just jump onto a little point there. It's kind of sometimes as architects we like to reinvent the wheel, and sometimes from when you get on site and you've got a kind of a brickie or a contractor that doesn't know the story behind it, they're like, why the bloody hell are you doing this? Why don't you just, this is all fancy stuff. It's all a bit, airy fairy. But sometimes there's a story behind that, and I think if you can communicate that with the contractor, quite often there might be a little bit of resistance at the start, but once they buy into it. So I remember years ago we had a site and it was a corner plot next to a listed pub conservation area, and the site was kind of a bit of a kind of dumping ground and drug addition to take it down and build, 4 flats. And it was an awkward site, and in order to kind of maximize the space, we had cantilever. It was an involved design, but in order to help us get it through planning, um, the um, the bricks we wanted it to be kind of wobbly bricks, kind of in and out. It didn't want to look pristine. Was the point?
Going for the rugged look.
As a rugged look, and we wanted the way to do that was the sun comes round and it casts lots of shadows on it. So we invented our own kind of pseudo random bonding pattern. So it wasn't a regular Flemish bond, English, but whatever stretcher bond. It had to look kind of old but new, so it was complicated. But we did a full set of drawings. We set it out, and I remember meeting these guys. Funnily enough, they were from the north, came down to do the bricks. Like, what the bloody hell's this? You don't know what you're doing, and they were kind of uh, arms up in the air, bloody architects. So I met with the guys on site and I explained to them why, in order to actually get this building to happen, and also why it would fit in the setting, was we need to make it look a bit rustic, and this is how I was going to do it. And actually, it was quite an economic way of doing it with these new bricks. And we did a few sample panels, and it was like that. That's all right. That's all right. Actually, once they got the building back halfway up, I remember they were so proud of it. Richard, come and look at this, look at this, look at, they're taking photographs of it. The sun's coming bouncing off it, and then the next thing, they're then taking your kind of principle and then going, oh, I can improve on it. Richard, look at this corner. You've drawn this. I can make it better.
Well, that's the
Brilliant,
perfect synergy there, isn't it? That's
brilliant.
the perfect situation of two parts of the industry working together to create something ultimately that is pushes the boundaries, shall we say, or is different, but is also improved upon as time goes on,
Yeah,
which ultimately benefits the client, right?
absolutely, absolutely. It was wonderful. Anyway, where did I get to? Oh yes, Paul gave me a job.
Yeah, we're
Well, give me a job. Start working on. So I'd been working on projects which were, I don't know, over 100 million, and now I'm working on projects that the clients are spending 200,000. Which is another reason for being in London. That's still a considerable amount of money for someone to spend on a private house back in 2005. Yes, so that's when I joined Paul. Yeah, it would have been 2005, and I was going to try out for a few years and then maybe assess my options. Paul promoted me to be an associate, an associate left. So an associate in the practice just becomes a bit more managerial. You start looking after certain tasks. It gives you start looking after teams. I mean, we're only 6 people at the time. Then we got to 8 people, 10 people, and then you need to kind of put structures in place, which is kind of what I wanted to grow. So I was promoted as an associate and given some managerial responsibilities. And as time has passed by, the practice grew Um, Thinking the biggest the practice got to was about 25 or 28, which was quite a significant size. Got to bear in mind, most architectural practices are quite small
Yeah.
teams. You know, the big ones might have 300 people, but actually anything over 15 is a medium-sized practice. So we were kind of unique at that time in that we were doing small projects, but we were quite large in comparison to a lot of practices doing similar scale work. And, you know, I was looking after resourcing, kind of you have that crystal ball in front of you of what's the economy doing, what's, you know, do we need more staff, less staff, you know, you learn how the business really operates, cash flow. Um, I would say when we went over 20 people, the dynamic of the practice changed. Um, you know, you go from being this little family unit to this kind of, you need to have more, you know, kind of not quite corporate structures, but you need systems in place. And to be fair, and then trying to keep on to the quality of the work and the design becomes much harder. So what we have agreed, and since we've gone up, we're currently at 15 staff. We're quite happy, you know, give or take. We might go over, you know, you get kind of people leave, some people go on. I don't think we ever want to grow massively. We don't want to be that 50-person practice. You
Definitely
know,
that transition, as you say there, and it's something that we see in sort of what we do and helping clients with that transition, because as you say, you do go from being a small, close knit team, all do it, you know, all having their own strengths, and it's I don't want to use the word control because it's the wrong word, but it's easy to monitor from a managerial perspective. You know where everyone is, you know what everyone's dog's name is, kids' name, you know, silly things like that. It will say silly, but it's important, you know, managing stuff like that. But you know, the things that we all forget, you know, and it's easy to keep a hold on that. As soon as you start growing the team out and you start moving into a more corporate system, it can really change the outlook of the business. And if not sort of handled carefully, can some businesses can topple because of it. It's a very difficult thing to manage and understand when to do it, if you actually should do it, because that's always the question, right? People, and I understand it, right? People say, oh, you know, we want to grow, we want to be this, we want to be that. But I think it's important before you make those statements or have those ambitions to understand why you're doing it, and whether actually the business you are and the work that you're doing and the work you enjoy doing that's lucrative, that you're renowned for, does it fit that more corporate model? And if it doesn't, you perhaps have to question why you're going down that route.
exactly. And I think just the our kind of client base is we do have some developer clients, but most are private homeowners, and so it's a very personal response. So you need that connection. So I go out and meet potential clients, and it's do we resonate with each other? Do we have that chemistry? And it's quite, and you learn about the kids, you know, the clients, the kids they have, they grow with the projects, the pets they have, and to do that and kind of remove, you know, as a corporate structure didn't quite fit. And the other thing, you get pulled away as you go up the kind of managerial ladder, and you get more kind of, you know, more spreadsheet and less pencil time, and you kind of go, what am I doing this for?
I think, and it's interesting you say that, and it's really refreshing to hear that you know you're looking at it realistically, rather than just this constant drive for growth at all costs. It doesn't matter. We just want to be this big architectural firm, and we want to be the biggest in size and all the rest of it. And I think it's refreshing to hear that you're sticking to what you do, because you do it very well. You understand the dynamics of the service you're offering there, where you mentioned, you know, you're doing private individuals residential, which is a very personal thing, right? You're going into people's homes. This isn't putting up 500 houses for Bellway or whatever. This is a very, you know, it's very personal. And I agree with you. I would say that you need to have an infrastructure in your business that reflects that and is able to service it properly.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think and let's be honest, if the goal was to make money, architecture is not the business to be in. There are easier ways and simpler ways to make money, I would
Yeah.
say, with less
Yeah.
stress.
Less stress, yeah. I think the thing is, it's funny you say that. It does come down to that, doesn't it? I think ultimately that ethos and the philosophy you have in the role that you're in, which is you're a director, and how that then sort of filters down into your team. And I think you it's whether if your drive is for money, you're in the wrong place.
Yeah,
And you attract and you recruit and you build your team out based on that philosophy that we're here. Obviously, look, right, it's commercial realities to everything. Okay. And anyone that denies that or tries to move away from it is deluded. Really, we all need to earn money.
yeah,
It is what it is. But I think you don't have to be driven solely by that. And there's definitely a lot more value you can give to your clients, to the team you work with as well, which I think is a big thing. Building that culture, developing your team, and making sure that that they're getting what they need, the training they need, etc., and the development they need. And if I think if you if your culture and your philosophy as a business is that, that sort of rings true with us as well in terms of a business, really. Not just completely motivated by money at all costs. There's no joy in that.
no, I mean, we're a business. We're not a charity. We have to make money to function. Completely agree. Now, if I jump in, just part of it is kind of we do have financial systems in place. We do look after that, but it's not the be all and end all. There's only so many projects I have in my lifetime, so why can't they all count? Do you know? Why can't I enjoy I enjoy what I do. I come into work and some days it's hard. This some days are harder than others, but to actually enjoy coming into work and create an atmosphere where our team enjoys coming into work. It's very interesting. COVID kind of obviously everyone worked from home, and then when people started coming back, everyone wanted to come back into the office. I
That
mean,
was extremely rare. A lot of people couldn't get them out of bed.
no, exactly. And we do people kind of work one day from home because they're easy kind of doing the task, but genuinely people want to come in because it's a nice atmosphere and we're still small knit and we just sit in one office and there's it's nice and supportive, and that's part of it. So where did I get to associate? Oh yes, so how did I become a director? So what I would say, there's three directors. There's myself, and then there's Emil, and there's Rob. And you can ask where Paul sits in that. So I think the best business decision that Paul made was he taught the three of us to go out and win work quite early on. And I say that generally is that I would, a client would phone the office, and I quite enjoyed picking up the phone and talking to potential clients. Paul was happy for me to do that. He was less comfortable with that. So I was the first filter, and I would then divide up between the four of us at that time who might go see. And it was great because you didn't just have one character. I had kind of four of us. So I might just go, oh, this is a Rob person, or I think I didn't always get it right, but who do I think best fits that client? You know, and we'd go off and we've been very successful. But what that meant was, we had four channels. Now, there was always a succession plan in place. So the three of us bought equity into the company, as it was going through. And then unfortunately Paul got ill, quite seriously ill. He's fine. He works for us just fine away, but he got seriously ill and it removed, him from the practice. Now, if the practice and some practice was solely spearheaded by one person, then it could have been curtains for the business. But like I say, the best decision he made is he had the three of us going out winning work. So we win our own clients. We had that kind of liaison, that the person that you meet carries the project through. So we had that continuity. We were controlling the cash flow, the workings of the business. So when Paul had to take a extended leave, he was only kind of controlling about 35% of the business at the time, which meant we could kind of hand the clients off. So despite all our kind of lovely design, which we'll come on to talk about, the business was quite robust.
That's a really really good point actually, Richard, and I hear this quite a lot in terms of other people that we've worked with in the past, and you'll get MDs or whatever leaders of the business come and say the problem that we have is, or the problem I have is, I am the business. So if I'm not there, if I'm not available, if I go on holiday, if I were to become ill or whatever, that nothing there is nothing else that happens. You remove me from the business, there is no business, which is an issue because obviously the longevity of the business, you don't know what's going to happen. you know the unexpected can happen. And also, if you, as a business owner, one day you might want to check out. You might want to say, do you know what, I've done my bit, I'm going to retire early or retire now, and I'm going to sell up. And if you are the business, there's nothing for anyone to buy or for you to pass to.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Which is interesting because we came to that problem, didn't we? When Paul kind of goes, "What do I come back and continue? Do I anyway?" Uh, Long story short, he sold the business to the three of us. So, and it was interesting because Paul's of there. Are you going to change the name? And we'd spent many years building up this brand, this, what, like, no, actually, that is what we are buying. The fact that, I've been here 20 years, Neil, I think 18, and Rob's been here longer. A lot of the projects we knew exactly we were buying ourselves. It wasn't like we were going in buying this, what, seemingly attractive business, but we don't know what the work, we knew what the workings were. Um, and it was Paul's baby, so it was quite hard for him to let go. But health reasons, he kind of did. But the way where we are, and then years ago, but where we are now is Paul's an employee. There was a kind of funny, transition. I think both for both of us, where he was my boss and I became his boss. We're well over that.
I was going to say, how's that going?
No, it's fine. I mean, to start with, I think it was difficult because he'd run the business for so long. But then what happened was just the processes, and he kind of, surpassed that. And then actually, um, where Paul sits at the moment, he was quite happy to go back on the tools, start drawing again. Doesn't do any client liaison, uh, but it's quite reassuring. It's quite nice to have an elder, if you like, older than I am, sometimes just to bounce ideas off.
I mean, he must have a great trust in the. You say there's three of you now, three directors.
Yeah, three directors, yes.
To write, I'm just thinking as you were talking there, I was just thinking about my business and if and when, if I ever get to a point where I can retire. But the idea of selling the business to people that obviously you've worked with Paul for a long time, but people you've developed, and you've got a long-standing relationship with them. But the thought of selling the business and passing it to someone else, and then coming back and working
Yeah,
underneath them, not that that's necessarily the issue for me, but I know what I'm like, and I know that I would constantly meddle because I'm a bit of a control freak. Like I'm not, and he so. And I imagine I don't know Paul. I've never spoken to Paul, but to build what he's built, I believe that people like that have to have a certain level of um, liking control and wanting their vision to come to life and pushing it through. So for him to be able to now come back, work for the business and work under you guys, and just be happy where he is, he must be very, very comfortable with you three and the way in the direction you're taking the business.
I think so, but maybe this is a lesson you can take. Is at this point, I'm the control freak, you're the control freak, and it was, as Paul once said, it's quite humbling. The biggest concern he had was would the design quality drop? We're designers. All architects have a bit of an ego. You need to. You always need to be the eternal optimist. It's how you get things through and how you build. And but with that, there's the other side of, like we say, the running the business, the stress is the kind of it removes you away sometimes away from the actual passion of what the core thing is. And once you've kind of got over that, and you take all the kind of, you know, the world moves on, the processes change, software changes. It's all, you know, the accountancy change, whatever rules change, you have to deal with all of that as well. And for Paul to go back and for me to say, "Oh, can you design this simple bit of detailing?" Paul's done it for many years. He makes it work. He can sketch it out. It's not like retraining a junior kind of, "Oh no, things need to be this side." He can just make it work. And then he kind of, embraces and enjoys that design process. And then again, he gets to, you know, do beautiful design without, all the kind of, hassle of the other parts of running a business. And then I think now he's very relaxed with that and enjoying that process.
What a great privilege for him to be able to build something to what it is, an established brand, successful brand, doing, the type of work that you guys want to be doing and are clearly very good at, have a fantastic reputation for, to then be able to pass that down and then eventually come back and just come in, be a bit of an oracle
Yeah.
and just do the stuff that you've always enjoyed doing that perhaps you've forgotten about or fallen out of love with or just stopped doing because of the, as you say, the stress of running the business for however many years.
Yeah,
So what a
exactly.
privilege.
Yeah, yeah. I've not really talked much about design or what we do at Paul Archer.
Oh, do you know what? Actually, Richard, I was going to say to you. Obviously, we touched on it earlier about the residential stuff and the sort of angle of it being a very personal service and building a team out. But I did want to sort of drill down a bit more on that and just
Yeah.
get a bit more of an understanding for the type of work you do. Like you mentioned you were up north, you've moved to London. You're doing residential work. I assume within the London area. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Islington, Camden, Hampstead, all around there is kind of our stomping grounds. But we cover anywhere within the M25 mostly. We have jobs in Chiswick, where and Croydon and kind of area, and then we have this kind of belt. It gets slightly few and further between out in Hertfordshire, the kind of the home counties. We have a site at the moment in the Cotswolds. Recently, we did many moons ago. We did Slackwood Farm up in Silverdale in Lancashire. But the projects need to be of a certain size to warrant kind of that travel. Whereas, we're based in Shoreditch, the transportation's excellent. We can get anywhere within London very quickly. So that's our broad base. Like I say, we are practice of, 15 at the moment. We tend to have about 40, 45 live projects at any one time, all at different stages. So I just add, so you might have some at early concept feasibility stage. You'll have some that go into planning. So there's a bit of a pause section on kind of detail design, production design, stuff going out to tender, and then a number of projects on site. So I suppose one of my key roles is managing that. As we know, the industry can be kind of feast or famine at times, and it's smoothing out those bumps so we get that continuity of work. Um, Typical project for Paul Archer Design, it's the full house refurb. Give us a full house refurb, basement, completely go through it, interiors, several bathrooms. Um, we are very good at taking kind of the Victorian Jordan townhouse and fitting it for modern day purpose. I would like to think we sensitively adapt. Some people may disagree. We have a slightly modern edge, but it's about how do we, give these houses, these properties a new lease of life. Budgets, 1 million, 2 million, very comfortable with. I think we're at the stage now where certainly the lower end, these sole practitioners come in. We can't compete with those people at overheads, and nor should we. I think just where we are sit in the, in our niche, as we are in a niche. Um, but we do a lot of work in conservation areas and listed buildings. Um, Homeowners coming and saying, well, they've bought a wreck. What can we do to it? The housing market is very tight in London, as I'm sure you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
And how do we improve these houses? And not just visually, but we are, you know, how do you improve insulation, thermal performance?
Yeah.
And you can't just go along and stick, some polystyrene to the walls of these houses. It has to be done very carefully, otherwise you create problems.
Well,
But
also, you want to preserve, I imagine, the original architecture. Some of the buildings, houses in London, particularly sort of in the areas that you mentioned you operate, are beautiful. They are very, very unique, and a lot of time and effort has gone into building them. It's not like the new builds that are going up now, where they're quite basic. But you want to, I imagine, do you find it? Well, I'm sure you don't find it difficult because you've been doing it for years, but just something that struck me is that contrast between your modern philosophy, if I could call it that. Maybe that's too strong a word, but you mentioned that you have a modern edge to your design
yeah,
and modernistic
yeah.
aesthetic. How do you pair that with the houses that you're going into that are of architecture of years gone by and preserving that?
I think, you respect the old. It was of a time. It's very easy to build a pastiche, but if you're not careful, it becomes quite Disneyfied because it's not the old. And you're not building just 9-inch brick blockwork with no insulation. The technology's changed, the building requirements of the modern age have changed. We need to insulate, we need to waterproof. People are less accepting of damp in their buildings, whereas 150 years ago, that. So it's how do you get the modern technology? Also, the way the houses are used. You'd see in these houses often, the access to the garden was restricted. They have utility rooms on the back, or it was lesser space. People want to enjoy the gardens now, so often the first point is how do you get the house to organize itself differently? And people often use the term flow for where they go, I like the flow of the Paul Archer design work. And I think it's just where you come in through the house and you work your way through the different spaces. And then how do you get light into these spaces? I'm pretty sure if the Victorians had the technology at the time, they would be doing big sheets of glass. They did. Crystal Palace.
Yeah.
There's lots of examples. It's just the technology wasn't there to do it in single sheets. So what I'm saying is the same principles are being applied. It's just the technology is advanced. And how do you make that space interesting? And I mean, reflective in our work is the variety in materials and textures. Because what we do is we kind of like bounce off our clients' needs. People are at different stages in their lives as well. It's
That's
very
true.
different if you're nest building, the family's growing, you're at that stage in your life and you're going to be here for the next 20 years, 30 years, or indefinitely, what you invest in your house and what requirements you need.
It needs to
Yeah,
be fit for purpose, what you're implementing.
exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas some clients, the kids have left home, they're going to, and they don't need more space, they need better organized space. Could be, and so the requirements are very different in terms of not just aesthetic, but just functionality. And I think what ties into that is, how do you make an old building, you know, more sustainable, less energy, just the energy consumption. And a big topic, air source heat pumps, MVHR, mechanical heat recoveries. How do you get these technologies into an old house without ruining the character of these old houses?
And also, as well, I imagine without completely blowing the client's budget, right? Because it's expensive, isn't it?
It is. And don't get me wrong, we're not in the budget where we sit in the kind of ranks. We're not budget architects. We're not working with budget contractors. The clients coming to us want good quality, solid build. It's not flip it, move on kind of. And people are willing to invest in their lives and well-being by having some beautiful detailing. And it comes down to what's important here when you sit in the morning and have that coffee and the light comes through, or that view, or that. And we talked at the beginning about the Sydney Opera House and just the setting, it's little moments that can make a huge difference.
Well, that's where the value comes from, I think, Richard. That people, it depends on the types of clients you're working for or looking to attract. But the philosophy that we try to adopt is, you want clients to see the value in what you do, not just looking at it. And commercial realities, everyone's different. but there are some people out there that just look purely at the bottom line constantly,
Yeah,
and don't necessarily see the value in what you're doing. And those little details that you just mentioned there, with the light coming in when you're having your
yeah,
morning coffee or
yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
particularly so someone's home, you're living there, you spend most of your time there, and you may have a family there or whatever. It's they're the things that make the difference, those small details, and that expertise in being able to identify where those small details will work and should work and implement them is where the value comes from.
I mean, I'll go back to the COVID time again. We got some lovely emails from clients, which were, we're all sat in our houses going, "My house is special," and it was heartwarming. It was just lovely to go. I'm sat here, and I have an amazing house. No matter what the spend was, there's these little moments.
Yeah, well, it's an investment. It's an investment in the property, of course,
Yeah,
but it's also an investment in yourself and your family, and your life in general, which I think sometimes can be missed. Particularly, I mean, we've had some work done at home, and when you're in the thick of it, and you know your house is ripped apart. I've got two young kids, and I look
yeah,
back at it now, and I don't quite know how we got through it, but um, my daughter had just been born, and basically the back of my house we had, I say renovated, but we changed the layout. We had a skylight put in, sort of a new kitchen type thing, and we didn't move out. We
yeah,
stayed there, and to the builder's joy, and it was really, really stressful, particularly with a baby.
yeah,
We had no running water at times, all of those things. No washing, and you things like washing machines, running water, heating, all of these things that we just take for granted. When they're taken away from you, you very quickly realise how reliant and lucky you are to have them. Um, but when at the end of it all, once the work was done and you're on the home straight, and rather than things being ripped out, things start going in, and it all starts to take shape, you really, for us anyway, it was a real sort of wow.
yeah,
Like the strain, the upheaval was completely worth it. And it's not, I live in a 3-bed semi-detached in East London. I'm not,
yeah,
I don't live in a mansion somewhere.
yeah,
It's a normal house, but it really, a lot of the reason we had it done when we moved into the house, we got it at a very reasonable price, because it was
yeah,
like a 1970s time warp. We
yeah,
built it off an elderly. We bought it off an elderly couple, and they hadn't decorated since I think 1974. So there was a lot of work that needed doing to it. But yeah, I mean, you can imagine the contrast and the difference going from polystyrene tiles on the ceiling and all the rest of it. And to now it was, yeah, and still now, and this was years ago. My daughter's 5 now, so but even now we look at it and you think, "Oh, do you know what? I really like this space."
that's it. That's it. That is priceless. I mean, if you go down the kind of if you put your kind of estate agent hat on for a moment, it's kind of we do spaces where people walk in. Well, another a compliment I got many years ago is the neighbor kind of came around to one of our clients and said, "Why is your house bigger?" It wasn't bigger; it just felt bigger. Just the positioning of roof lights and the openings, so the quality of space, it can raise the value that way just by having just better space. And it's not always it's not, I'm not talking about blingy finishes. It's just having better light, better access, better flow.
And though the combination of those things, when put together properly, and in a way that is intelligent and by someone who has the experience to do that, makes a huge difference. So we mentioned earlier about sustainability in general, but particularly in relation to what you guys do, which is something that is a huge. I mean, it's a very, very hot topic at the moment, particularly in the construction and built industry, which has always historically been carbon heavy because of the nature of it. Um, how do you see the sort of future? If you can move that onto like the future outlook of the industry and for Paul Archer, and how are you managing that sustainability piece in what you do?
Yeah, very, very, very hot topic. And I think the conversation shifts quite often on where we should be heading. I think just the reality is, well, we're building things, it's always going to have some kind of impact. like many architects, can we reuse? So I think, instead of bulldozing, knocking down buildings, could we actually look what's there? Because there's a huge amount of embodied energy already. And if we don't have to replace, then you've saved yourself a lot to start with. There's a house on our website, Willowbrook, which we pretty much rebuilt, but it was a kind of, you know, the bricks from the original house we inherited were came from a Manchester warehouse. The client gave us almost a kind of free brief. Do you want to change the brick? Do you want what do you like to do? And I was like, no, we should keep the brick. The bricks are one, they're beautiful, but two, you've got a massive pile of bricks we should use. And then it became, and so where you've got opportunities like that, I think reuse is certainly, you know, hotly debated at the moment, or being implemented. I think as well, a subtle change in, yes, we want to insulate houses and make them more energy efficient, but there's more of a switch as well to kind of well-being and breathability, less plastic, less membranes. Now, there's a lot of membranes on it that, serve a purpose. But again, looking at hempcretes, looking at wood fiber insulation, kind of technologies that are quite basic in their builder. I mean, wood fiber, pulp fiber, or hempcrete, just pulped, husk with clay, for want of a better word, or lime renders, which allows kind of moisture to come in and out. So it's not just about energy; it's about how the building reacts. And what we have been doing is post-occupancy monitoring some of our projects. We put 5 probes around the house and monitor the temperature, but also the humidity fluctuation. And the response has been very positive. Out the house feels nice to be in. It's not just a temperature gauge kind of thing, kind of leveling out those fluctuations. A lot of experimental parts in the industry, cork. Some architects
Yeah.
specifying cork, but the reality is we it's not tested long enough. There was a bit where people were insulating the outside of their homes. You know, how long do we need to know before we know has that worked?
Yeah, sure.
From finding mold, or the thing in the industry at the moment where people have had their lofts sprayed.
What's the testing period for that? When do we say, yeah, roll it out en masse type thing?
Yeah, exactly. And then and I think, the government has a part to play in this. There was the Green Deal, and there are certain kind of grants to kind of encourage people. But if you think about the housing stock and improving the housing stock, it's a massive, massive, massive task to improve the sustainability. But I think when clients come to us by and large, they're interested. If you bought this very expensive house in central London, so let's face it, they are expensive, and you're going to be there for the unforeseeable, 20, 30 years, then it makes sense to invest in improving the thermal performance. Windows, you can install beautiful sash windows with all the detailing, but double glazed just better insulated.
And presumably that now is part of the commercial reality of and the practical reality of what you're implementing. So what I mean by that is, yes, we want to design interiors, fit outs, whatever that are aesthetically pleasing, of course, and to the client's liking. But now there's this added element that's almost being bolted on
Ah,
where it needs to be sustainable. Well, yeah, sustainable, and not ridiculously expensive in terms of carbon.
yeah, exactly. And it's simple things. Got people paved over the driveways. It's a problem. Is there a way? On most plots, you can get, whether it's a green roof, whether it's a planter, whether it's a more established garden design. You can bring that into the scheme. Water retention, or just quite a fan of bird boxes or bee boxes in some of our schemes. You can do very little things that can make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's also having the being in the right mindset. So, firstly, being cognizant of it, that this is something that we need to be aware of, and then having the ingenuity to deliver solutions or offer solutions that perhaps are well, yeah, innovative.
Yeah, yeah.
And what on also in and the other part of it as well is in keeping with the building that you are working on? Because I imagine there are some restrictions, and probably in some cases plenty of restrictions, when you, particularly when you're dealing with listed buildings, to what you can actually do and implement, because there will be restrictions inevitably.
Absolutely. So another thing we have in the office is, you'll meet somebody and say, well, you're the client, but the building's also the client as well. Building will kind of guide you or dictate in some respects. As you know, you worked on your own house. I'm sure there was some point where you was on site going, "Ooh, what do we do here?"
Plenty of times. More
Yes,
times than I will ever care to admit or try and remember.
but that's why it's important to have a team that can deal with that and work with that. And sometimes it's quite positive. The building's saying, "No, don't do this." You open up a wall, you find a piece of tin, whatever it is, an obstruction, and you have to work with it.
Yeah, well, Richard, it's been real pleasure talking to you, and thank you for your time again. You've offered some really great insights there. So where can we find Paul Archer Design?
So paularcherdesign.co.uk, we have our website. Um, we're on Instagram at Paul_Archer_design. Yeah, follow us there.
There you go, guys. Make sure you go and give Paul Archer a visit. And I'm looking at their stuff. They've got some great stuff on there, some really interesting projects. So if you're interested in this type of architecture, or indeed you're someone that's thinking about having a renovation, check them out.
Okay.
Thank you, Richard, and we will speak soon. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Pleasure.